Hey, what's going on, everyone? Alex here. Chained Echoes and Sea of Stars. Both games couldn't be more different. And yet, the comparisons have begun, with JRPG fans taking either one side or the other, or both. Because we have so many different tastes in games, a lot of you are probably wondering how each game fares in several areas. So I've decided to break down what each game does, with the hopes of giving you the clarity to choose which game is right for you. Let's begin. Story is what propels JRPGs, and Chained Echoes and Sea of Stars have very different approaches when it comes to its storytelling. Now, both games have flawed moments, I would say, with some parts paced better than the others. And also, in terms of its writing, I did find that Chained Echoes' characterizations a bit lacking, with Sea of Stars having moments where the writing might not be good for people who are more sensitive to grammar mistakes. And again, I'm not trying to knock on any of these games, I'm just basically stating what I felt about these. That being said, of the two, while I love the adventure feel of Sea of Stars, Chained Echoes eked out a bit for me because of its constant forward-moving momentum. And again, that's despite the pacing problems that I've hinted at. And while the world and the lore of Sea of Stars is quite fascinating, there's something about the grounded world of Chained Echoes that felt very interesting and very intriguing, and something that I really wanted to get to know from beginning to end. And so, at least for me, because both games do have really good storytelling, Chained Echoes ekes out a little bit ahead of Sea of Stars because of its constant forward movement. With regards to the battle and progression system, what's really interesting about both Sea of Stars and Chained Echoes is that they're both inspired by the best 16-bit JRPGs, but each approach is quite different. Sea of Stars, for example, managed to strip away a lot of the complexities of JRPGs, which makes it appear that it has a lot less depth, but it actually has a lot of depth in the battle system as opposed to the progression system, which basically means that you spend less time in the menus, which is great. On the other hand, in Chained Echoes, there's a little bit more that it offers that makes powering up your characters a bit more interesting. And it also strips away the traditional leveling/experience point system that other JRPGs have, so they're really trying to figure out a way to create a more challenging battle system without having to conform to a lot of the genre norms. Not only that, there's also this kind of director-ish style kind of momentum system that Chained Echoes has that prevents you from easily overpowering enemies. You want to make sure that there are ebbs and flows during combat that makes Chained Echoes battles a bit interesting in that regard, and quite challenging, if I can be frank. So, of the two games, I think Chained Echoes wins handily for me because of that temperature system, and all of the really neat innovations that really worked at the end of the day. Graphically, both games fall into this retro-style JRPG art design that harkens back to the 16 and 32-bit era of JRPGs. I don't think it's too accurate to say that it's 16-bit, given how much colorful both games are. But setting that aside, I think, for me, hands down, Sea of Stars wins this. That's, again, not to say that Chained Echoes looks worse or anything like that. I actually really do like the art design of Chained Echoes, especially with the kind of mood that dominates this entire game. But Sea of Stars for me, with its ingenuity, the fact that every single sprite and background is actually mapped to a 3D surface so that they can actually cast shadows, is truly fascinating and very innovative from that perspective. It might go overboard and be overproduced, but there's something to be said about the beauty of Sea of Stars that makes it still run at a really high frame rate despite all of this stuff that I mentioned, regardless of what platform you play it on. And the characters are very expressive, not to mention the variances in color, the different moods it's able to depict thanks to the lighting. Like, if I rephrase the question and say which game actually went overboard on the graphics, Sea of Stars wins it handily, which is why it is my winner for this category. Given that both games don't have voice acting, naturally the soundtrack has to do a lot of the heavy lifting, which also extends to its audio design. While I do appreciate Eric W. Brown's track list in Sea of Stars, Eddie Marianocro's soundtrack in Chained Echoes really won me over with a lot of flourishes and melodies that hark back to a lot of the classics of the JRPG genre. And I think because of this reverence and callbacks and spinning that around and reutilizing them in very fresh ways reminds me of Masayoshi Soken and what he does with the Final Fantasy soundtracks when those get reintroduced in Final Fantasy XIV. But Eddie does a lot more things. He's also very much aware of note progression in these games and what emotions get invoked because of those. And while I really loved Eric W. Brown's soundtrack, as well as Yasunori Mitsuda's contributions to it, Chained Echoes was a soundtrack that I literally just wanted to get in day one and wanted to listen through the entire soundtrack just so I can relive a lot of those awesome memories that I had with this adventure. So Chained Echoes handily for me. While the story of Chained Echoes won it over for me, it's the characters of Sea of Stars that, to me, were the best parts of that game. Part of why that is because of how much time Sea of Stars spent on the first 3 characters that you get in your party, and just establishing the characters and who they are as individuals really sold the idea that we're going on an adventure with a whole bunch of our friends. And I think some of the marks of the best JRPGs have this in mind. I really loved the characters in Sea of Stars because, for one, they're not a huge group of people, but you know that they stick together, and there's something really special about a very intimately small group of people traveling together to achieve their goals. And again, that's not to throw shade at Chained Echoes, which had really fantastic characters and very interesting stories. I think I like the lightheartedness of the characters in Sea of Stars, which is kind of weird that I like the more serious tone of Chained Echoes from a story perspective. But it is what it is, and that's why Sea of Stars wins this category for me. Before I played Sea of Stars, I did not even consider that level design in JRPG dungeons can evolve. Now, yes, I played through games like Persona 5 that really creatively tried to redefine what a JRPG dungeon looks like and feels like. But in terms of retro-flavored RPGs like Chained Echoes and Sea of Stars, there hasn't been a lot of forward momentum when it comes to this style of JRPG. So I was immediately surprised by how much you could do in Sea of Stars dungeons. You can mantle over things, drop through things, climb on walls, do push block puzzles, and so much more that it really created this variance and helped create an identity for each of the places that you visited. That's not to say that Chained Echoes dungeons don't have their own flavor and character, they do. But in terms of interesting things to do, Sea of Stars definitely has a lot of really cool nooks and crannies and exploration and hidden areas that reward exploration. Because if there's one thing that I really love about JRPGs is finding a way back to the back alleys and finding treasure chests that nobody else has discovered, and Sea of Stars definitely feels rewarding when you explore its areas. Both Chained Echoes and Sea of Stars do different things very well, as demonstrated by this video. But ultimately, it's all up to you which one fits what you want to play today and the coming days, and I hope that this video helped out with that. That said, if you played both games, I want you to share which one you'll declare the winners for each of the categories I mentioned. Post your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend checking out my Sea of Stars review in the card linked up top. It's got a deep dive into the game's combat system that you'll want to check out. And also check out my review of Chained Echoes linked in the card below. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.